have streaming going on, so we have to be really disciplined. And the earlier we start, the earlier the final remarks follow, the earlier you have a chance to discuss informally all the findings of today's fruitful discussions. Stasia, do you want to make a formal presentation? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Maria. This is going to be presentation of the sociological research presented by Philipp Bikanau, who is one of the co-authors of the research. The topic of research and discussion is Belarusians in Poland, Lithuania, Georgia, attitude to the war, help to Ukraine, discrimination. Thank you.
And for those who are watching live, just be aware that people in the room are not able to see the slides because of some lighting issues. So our speaker will be, or half able, one person shows me he is able, he has very sharp vision. So Philipp will be making sure that he pronounces some of the figures that you might see on the slides. It's not because he wants you to really get them, but because some people may not see them. Also, you were told it's not a discussion, it's a presentation, so what's that? We hope it will be a discussion, so everyone who sits here has to come up with at least one feedback or question or intervention to fill in our time. As neither me nor my speaker have no clue what to discuss between ourselves for 90 minutes. However, not to start from that and to give you a little bit of clue about what actually Philipp has done, as long as you have not read all the 27 pages of his wonderful survey. We will start from the presentation, then I'll ask a couple of questions to Philipp, maybe to explain a couple of the slides or to present some new data. And after that, we will try to do it as interactively as possible with you and Philipp engaging into either questions and answers or discussions about this large topic. With that, I move to Philipp. Please also present yourself, of course, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the floor. Name's Philipp Bikanau. I'm an independent sociologist mostly, but I would say like half of my projects go with the help of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung these days. So yeah, that's the first acknowledgement I'm going to make today. And I thank Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for the opportunity, for the platform, for the possibilities that they provide us in order to, gather the evidence to potentially make Belarusians' lives abroad a bit better and to, stop the suffering for a while. Other acknowledgement I would have to make is to a brilliant sociologist, the colleague of mine, Ale Halampeu, the man behind the idea of this particular research, the man behind the methodological approach, and the author of the analysis of the Poland part of the report. Georgian and Lithuanian analysis was performed by myself. With that behind us, let's proceed to the report itself. So, what are we going to talk about? It's going to be about the experience of Belarusians who live in Poland, Lithuania, and Georgia. We did the research after the war began because of the suspiciously high amount of anecdotal evidences of the discrimination that Belarusians faced, of the bad behavior they had to encounter, of the structural problems that they had to overcome while being refugees either from Ukraine or while fleeing the regime. Yeah, and that's where the idea was born, to survey this, to quantify this experience and to draw some conclusions about that. In this report we are going to talk about the forms this discrimination takes, the prevalence of this, and we will try to describe the people who are suffering from it through the lens of their attitudes to the war, through the lens of their attitudes to the Belarusian regime, and through the lens of their attitudes to supporting Ukrainians. So let us begin. First of all, a bit about the sampling and whom did we survey. The survey was held in 3 countries, in Poland, Lithuania and Georgia. Data collection was done mostly with the help of the magnets for the immigrant communities, such as Belarusian Youth Hub for Poland. It helped us to survey more than 1,000 respondents in Poland from different voivodstva, which allowed us to make assumptions that our sample is, that we can utilize the statistical instruments in order to analyze what we did. In Lithuania, it was mostly, we helped the Batkovshchina, Belarusami, the quite old organization which deals with the Belarusian diaspora. In Georgia, it was mostly done through the snowball sampling. Snowball was utilized in Poland and in Lithuania as well. As we can see, our sample is really highly educated. It differs from the Belarusian, from the distribution among the Belarusian general population quite highly. This is probably due to the fact that it is easier to live for a better educated person, and that the people who are more inclined to leave due to the persecutions in Belarus more often happen to be better educated. And also, well, the age structure is also different. Younger people tend to leave. Most of our sample, I believe that's going to be the next slide, I guess. Let me check. No. Most of our sample left Belarus either after August 2020 or after the war began, the full-scale invasion began. So these are mostly like younger people who left during either first or the second wave of mass exodus, let's put it this way, from Belarus. Yeah, of course, also one more acknowledgement. We understand that we perhaps missed some of the Belarusians who are living in Poland and Lithuania because it is just not possible to understand how many exactly Belarusians are here. The Polish authorities do not know themselves. We just don't have the so-called sample frame, the information about how many people reside in Belarus, in Poland, in Lithuania. So it's really hard to build the sample in these countries. But our experience and test of the assumptions of the connections of studied parameters such as discrimination, attitudes to war, to education or to age or to gender, there were no significant relationship between that. So we assume that we're good with our sample, that we can proceed and that we can extrapolate the results to the whole Belarusian community in said countries. To the results. First of all, let's talk to the attitudes to Belarusian regime. It was quite a shocker to me as a sociologist, because you rarely see this kind of unanimous unanimity of respondents, but one could argue that it's virtually impossible to find in Poland, Lithuania or Georgia a Belarusian who would be living after the August 2020 who would support the regime or Lukashenko himself. That's just 99% in each country says that they disapprove of the actions of Lukashenko. Same goes for the war. Yeah, it is clear, that virtually every Belarusian who took part in the survey and who is probably in Poland or Lithuania supports Ukrainian war effort. And we understand that some of this might be due to, you know, the biases such as social desirability bias, because the consensus inside these countries kind of, you know, disapproves of supporting Russia, but the figures are so high, yeah, and this social desirability bias can never, it cannot explain that dramatic difference. So it is safe to assume that if a Belarusian person, if you stumbled upon a Belarusian person in one of these countries, it is really safe to assume that they would be supporting Ukraine. That is something that we can clearly tell from the results of the survey. We asked which country people, which actor on the global stage people tend to blame for the war. That's Russia, and 1/3 of respondents blame Belarus. If we ask, well, who's to blame primarily, that's obviously Russia. That's also 99% of respondents, in 97 to 98% of respondents in each of the countries. So there is a consensus here as well. It's interesting to compare that to the distributions that, say, Chatham House offers for Belarusian population, and it's not directly comparable, of course, but in Belarusians abroad tend to more often call Belarus responsible, at least partly, than Belarusians inside the country. Because inside the country, the question was, would you agree or not, or disagree that the Belarusian state is co-aggressor in the war? And it was around 20%, if I'm not mistaken. Here we have range from 34 to 42%, which means that people are Belarusians abroad are more likely to associate Belarusian regime with the war as well, and the whole country. Funny part here is the blame which is put on EU and USA. It is safe to say that this is, given the other figures and overwhelming blame on Russia, it's probably those people who said that USA is to blame, thinking that USA did not do enough to prevent this, to maybe arm the Ukrainians better, or European Union did not do enough maybe to stop, you know, getting the gas or oil from Russia. Going further, we asked if a person took part in supporting Ukrainians after the war, anyhow, to help in Ukraine or Ukrainians, Ukrainian army or Ukrainian refugee in any way. People are, as you can see here, mostly like 73%, at least 3/4 in each of the country are supporting Ukraine or Ukrainians in either way. In Poland, it's a bit, I remind you that the survey was taken in May. Yeah, it was in April even for Poland, and end of May for Lithuania and Georgia. So the figures are now probably higher. In Poland, it's a bit higher than on the other countries. This is, well, simply due to the fact that there are more possibilities to engage with helping Ukrainians here, because you can donate directly, you can volunteer, there are more Ukrainians in Poland. When we're talking about this help, it's not like, you know, posting stickers on social media or spreading the information. We did very specific, thorough check to see, to establish how many of those who helped only did this in social network, only answered, I was spreading the information in social network, or I supported Ukraine by expressing solidarity on social media, and it's around 1% in each of the countries. So when we see that people say that they participated in the rally, that's probably like 60% of those who was in Poland took the part. Most popular way are money transfers and well, participation in the rallies, making the Belarusian support visible. In Poland, it's more often, as I mentioned, it's more often the provision of material assistance, helping by engaging in volunteer activities, simply due to the fact that it's easier to do it here, as always, as I mentioned. And in Lithuania and Georgia, the charitable events in support of Ukraine is more one of the more common ways, due to the fact that quite a lot of for instance, in Georgia, quite a lot of people who escaped Belarus are IT specialists, for instance, who donate money more often. And in Poland, there are better, not better, but the other ways to participate. And to the point about the discrimination and how then after that we will discuss a bit how it does connect with helping Ukrainians actually. So first of all, how do we understand discrimination in this particular survey? It is the restriction of the rights or opportunities of a person or social group or unequal treatment of them on the basis of nationality or citizenship. Well, we see that some of the instances that could be ascribed to discrimination by our respondents are really subjective, such as, well, you know, someone was mean to me, and people respondent might think that it was due to the Belarusian citizenship, yeah, but due to Belarusian passport. We understand that this hardly qualifies as this form of discrimination. Nevertheless, we keep it this way because this contributes to the atmosphere of hate and nervousness that Belarusians experience sometimes on the daily basis, as we will see follows to the figures. So, if we would ask Belarusians, did they encounter the discrimination personally? As many as 30% in Poland and 39% in Georgia say yes. In Lithuania, the percentage is much lower. It's twice as low. It's like 16%. We don't. Not only do we talk about the personal experience, but also like, people tend to, you know, live social lives, communicate with one another. So the experience of those of their, you know, circles also matter in this regard, because we are talking about the impression, the atmosphere. So we asked also about the acquaintances experience, and this is, well, expectedly much higher. It correlates that in Lithuania it's much better percentage. So if we would aggregate all of those, we could then state that as of May 2022, in Poland and Georgia, the discrimination of Belarusians was part of social reality for many people. It was like for 58% of Belarusians in Poland either experienced discrimination themselves or their acquaintances did it, and so they are aware of this, of the discrimination against Belarusians. It's 59% for Georgians, and it's 39% for Lithuanians. What kind of behavior was attributed to discrimination? So here is a very thorough distribution. Please don't get scared. I'll try to, you know, guide you through it. So first of all, the most popular cause is the verbal abuse, of course, as I mentioned. Yeah, we counted this as the discrimination, but we do understand that this is not a structural issue. This is manageable, I guess. For some reason, for some people, it's really painful, but it's not that much of a big deal. But it contributes to the atmosphere of hate. And as we're going to see next in Poland, this cross-checks with the results of the survey of Poles and their attitudes to Belarusians and other nationalities. So the two most popular are verbal abuse face-to-face, verbal abuse online. The third most popular is refusal of bank services, which is also ambiguous, and we had this discussion with Vitis Jurkonis, I believe, on the online presentation of this report, who was saying that it hardly qualifies as discrimination because, well, and as Alexei said today in the first panel, that it was always like that with banks. I mean, there were... Okay. it was, I might have misunderstood you or misattributed the words, but Vitis Jurkonis was certainly saying that it was kind of always like that with banks. The system was really like bad. Should I be like afraid or something? No? Okay.
Well, you speak loudly, but let's keep the interactions for after the presentation, because our interpreters are able only to translate what the person on stage or with the microphone has. Okay, so let's try to not quote other people's words, not to provoke them to,
yeah, sorry. Okay.
to reply.
I'm sorry for that. I'll try to finish the presentation and then stick to the discussion. So the refusal of housing in Poland is much lesser of a common case than in Lithuania and in Georgia. In Georgia, well, one can observe the new iteration of this at this very moment, since the Russians are lining up, you know, to get the housing. And Natalia Ryabova, who was present at the presentation on the online as a Georgian, Belarusian and Georgian, so some sort of an expert actually provided us with the, you know, some sort of a proof or cross-checking information and other evidence that this is really the case, that Georgians are reluctant to lend the apartments to Belarusians. So probably the most hurtful is the denial of employment, which is 17% in Poland and only 2% in Georgia. So why is the difference? First of all, well, in Georgia, people who go to Georgia from Belarus, they tend to, you know, bring their job with themselves. They are either working in IT or in NGOs or whatever, because they rarely find a job in Georgia. Also, the Georgia was treated at the time as, you know, the hub between Belarus and European Union. Like, people would come to Georgia and wait for humanitarian visa to Poland or other Schengen visa or whatever. And then they would just go to Poland, and so they rarely sought a job in Georgia, so hence the low percentage of that. But in Poland and in Lithuania, 17 and 11%, despite like looking like not really that much, it's kind of disturbing, because, well, that's the whole, the Christomatic, like classical case of structural discrimination, when people like holding the power over you to, you know, lower your wage on the basis like that you are Belarusian. And this is supported with a lot of anecdotal evidence. Like you just have to, you know, Google for a while to find some stories on the internet, like of people being fired because their employers thought that they are like Russophiles or communists or supporters of Lukashenkovцы or whatever. That's a rather widespread stereotype about Belarusians among Polish people, which I mentioned earlier today. In Georgia, there is actually interesting part about overpricing of goods or services. It's 25% of Belarusians who encountered this case, and it was really hard to believe, I mean, for me, because I was thinking like about some data error, but well, our interviewing of people who are residing in Georgia and talking to Natalia Ryabova, for instance, well, they confirmed that Georgian people, well, they tend to, you know, meddle with the prices when they see that the person is from Belarus, and they attribute this to Belarusian nationality as well. Going further, it is really important whom was the actor, who was, like, you know, providing the basis for discrimination, who was discriminating, like person of which nationality. So, and we see that in Poland it's like mostly Ukrainians or locals, right? So here on the slide it says locals, Poles, Georgians and Lithuanians, which means respectfully, of course, Poles in Poland, Lithuanians in Lithuania, Georgians in Georgia. It's not like combined in each country. Ukrainians in Poland were abusing Belarusians even more often than the locals. And that's the only case for all three countries. In Lithuania, well, the percentage is lower for Ukrainians, a bit higher for locals, but, well, it's kind of, you know, comparable. In Georgia, only 21% of Ukrainians, which is like significantly lower than in Poland and Lithuania. And accordingly, the higher percent of the locals, well, explanation is rather simple, of course. There are much less Ukrainians in Georgia. And the chance of encountering the Ukrainian in Georgia is just like much lower. The funny part is like actually, and the Belarusians, well, the people who identified their abusers as Belarusians for Lithuanians, and we checked every case thoroughly. It's probably like something of the old Belarusian people who most likely don't even identify themselves as Belarusians anymore, but they would call the newcomers like, you know, same like Lukashenkovцы and stuff like that. It's not really like a widespread or systematic stuff, but well, we encountered it and it's significantly higher. Yeah. Also, the Poles in Lithuania, well, that's the very specific case of nationality in Lithuania, and the Poles in Lithuania are a bit, you know, very special case in its own. It's a matter of the long discussion, so we will just skip it. But it is worth remembering that Ukrainians are really likely to, you know, abuse Belarusians. They, of course, have less structural power, you know, to be discriminative towards Belarusians, but they contribute quite a lot to the atmosphere of hate. We asked how acute do people consider the situation? How important is it? How important is the problem of discrimination? And we see here that despite having the same level of discrimination as in Poland, the Georgian rate is on par with the Lithuanian estimation. How can this possibly be explained? Well, first of all, Georgia is not always a final destination, as I was mentioning. So a lot of people went out of Georgia, probably those who participated in the survey already. Some of them are already in Poland or Lithuania or in other countries. Also, as we're going to see further, the discrimination encountered with the Ukrainians is perceived as more acute, that's a bit of a spoiler actually, but we will talk about it later. In Lithuania, it's kind of logical because, well, the overall level of discrimination was just lower. Wrong button, I'm sorry. How can we possibly explain such high levels in Poland? Apart from the higher prevalence of structural discrimination, such as, you know, problems with work or in banking or with housing. We have the access to the survey of Poles, yeah, and it is safe to say that the war affected the Polish opinion of Belarusians quite severely. Here on the chart you can see the so-called Bagardus scale of a social distance. Yeah. So the higher the score, from 1 to 7, the respondent been presented with the list of nationalities, like starting with Poles and ending with Russians. And the list is quite long. I mean, around 15 or 17. I won't count them now. Nations, and they were asked to answer. Would they be okay if a representative of this nationality would be their neighbor, their friend, their 7 positions, where the first is the closest one. It's I can't recall exactly. Is it the neighbor, or is it like the spouse of their children? But that's something really close. And the 7 would mean like none at all. I would prefer not to see them in my country at all. So this scale has the standard interpretation, and each step means the longer social distance between a person who is responding and the social group he is describing. And we could see, do we have the laser here by any chance? yeah, wow. We could see that Belarusians are kinda really far away. You see, further from Belarusians are only the Arabs, Afghans, and Russians. The Russians is actually not very, happy nation. It's not really good idea to be Russian and Polish in Poland these days because, well, apart from that, the stereotypes about the Russians are much more violent than about the Belarusians. They are considered like, if we would ask a Polish person to describe the Russian person in 3 words, he would be probably saying something really violent like murder or drunkard or whatever. So all the negative stereotypes, yeah, all the negative description. With Belarus, it's also not that great, but at least it's not like murderers or whatever. It's more often like slaves or supporters of Lukashenko. But yeah, the Belarusians are further distanced nationality. Well, the closest is of course Poles. That's the benchmark. The Poles tend to, accept Poles better. Sorry, I just saw the signs. Please speak slowly. Yeah, and then we see the distance, and the other nationalities enjoy this quite high level of tolerance. Ukrainians do as well. You can see how closer Ukrainians are perceived by Poles than Belarusians. That's the distance. And the other scale I want to show is the implicit bias. Actually measured the 2 scales. The respondents, as far as I understand, were asked to agree or disagree with a set of items which would describe people they don't like, people they admire, themselves, and the nations. It was these items were grouped into 2 axes. Well, I won't bother you with the technicalities. It's called factor analysis and whatever. Yeah, so result is the map where in the left bottom quadrant are, the people I don't like. The top bottom quadrant are the people I admire. Yes, and the closer the nationality is to this dot, or this dot would indicate that the less implicit, well, hate or disadmiration the person has to the nationalities. And here, let's find the Russians on the map. That's here. They are here. They are. Evaluation is a set of traits which are, good people, kind people. So the further to the left, the less often they are attributed with such traits. And the axis Y is potency activities like dumny, powerful, proud. Yeah. Dumny is proud, powerful, stuff like that. So the lower on the map, the less likely are the nationalities to be attributed to this point. And so here we find Russians, which are evaluated the worst, and here are the Belarusians, which are the less powerful of all. You see, so it correlates a lot with the stereotypes that they provide, like calling Belarusians slaves and stuff like that, and or weak, or well, Russophiles. And we share this lower bottom quadrant with the Russians, Arabs, and Turks. And well, Jews are kind of, on the borderline. With Jews, it's actually funny because this is about the implicit attitudes, and the previous graph was about explicit attitudes. So the Jews on the previous graph are, more closely, but implicitly you see. So that's how I would explain the gravity of this graph, this figure, the gravity that Belarusian people felt in May, in April, when confronting the discrimination in Poland. And one last thing is about this assessment of importance of discrimination is much higher among those who encounter discrimination from Ukrainians. So you see, it's those who rated it from 8 to 10 are likely to be in this column, And those who say that it's not important at all are likely to be here because, it is probably that the discrimination from locals for some reason is less painful for Belarusian people. And let's look why. Because even among those who personally encounter discrimination, we ask the questions, do you plan helping in future to Ukraine or to Ukrainians due to war? And here's the distribution, like it's overwhelmingly yes, a little less overwhelmingly hard to say, and less than 10% said no. So people are still inclined to help Ukraine and Ukrainians despite the discrimination. And so the people feel really bad about being discriminated by the very people they tend to, support, help. Virtually every Belarusian thinks that, Russia is responsible, supports the Ukraine in the war, donates, participates in some form of support of Ukrainians, maybe the meetings, maybe the rallies, maybe the money donation, maybe the volunteer activity. Belarusians fight in Ukrainian army. Belarusians, do all kind of support, and when they encounter the discrimination from Ukrainians, of course it's going to be a bit more painful than, probably the same words from the locals. With the Ukrainians, it's mostly about verbal abuse, So yeah, that's basically the context. It's worth mentioning that this situation describes, that this research describes the situation a few months ago. Yeah, so this is kind of the old data, and we have no I have no, let's say, expectations that the discrimination level became lower since then. Yeah, because, Belarus still participates in the war. The rockets still go on. Lukashenko still says, still spews hate. So the educational campaigns are never, they are not existent. A lot of people in Poland do not understand whom are the Belarusians who are in Poland these days. In Georgia, the same as well. It's a bit better in Lithuania. Yeah, but one could assume that the situation just got worse because that's the more plausible option. Then the situation suddenly got better without any reason for it to get better. With this, I would probably finish the reporting part. And we could go to
and you'll
discuss.
Start getting interrogated by me first, but first the round of applause. That's brilliant work you've done. So, first of all, I think it's very timely, and it's great that you used the Belarusian diaspora so much to collect the data. Am I correct that these were only people who moved from Belarus after August 2020?
Overwhelmingly.
Overwhelmingly. But were people who moved longer ago?
Yeah, they were part of the survey, but the issue here is that before 2020, I would say one could argue that the Belarusian diaspora is some sort of grouped, institutionalized community. It was rather non-existent, especially in comparison with what happened after 2020. So
no, sure. I was just trying to understand the setup of respondents, because of course, people who I live in Poland for 16 years. Some of the responses there seemed so familiar, but also after 2006 and 10 and 15 elections, we've experienced a bit of that. But I will not speak about my empirical experience. I would rather want you to, after you drink your water, shift to that slide with 2 axes where you had the explicit nations, traits and attitudes. Oh, yeah, the tolerance one. If you can have a look, you see that Lithuanians somehow score really low. They're like 4 and Belarusians are like 5 on the scale to 1 to 7, although Lithuanians do not seem to be supporting Putin or really being engaged in the war. Moreover, they're competing with Poles in their generous attitude to Ukrainians and Belarusians. And if you see the Vietnamese regime has not really explicitly supported Putin, and Vietnamese has been living here in Poland for at least 30 years, also seem to be scoring quite low on tolerance while being a real vibrant part of the community. So the question I ask here, how much did you compare the overall level of xenophobia of Poles to non-Western nations or non-Poles as compared to just being a Belarusian as a main reason for discrimination, comparing to be just non-Pole, you know, or non-American?
I am afraid I will not be able to answer this question thoroughly because these 2 slides are apparently not from my research. So
you see,
I just
I think I
happen
just
to have
gave
them
you
on
the
hand.
idea. But
I could speculate. I could speculate because, well, first of all, it's the scale of social distance. It's like it's not only about the political inclinations or thinking about the support of course, of the Russia's war in Ukraine or whatever. Because, and the Lithuanians in Poland, well, and Poles have, well, quite a history, of course, as because, well, the neighboring nations and the Kresy Wschodnie and stuff like that. It's I'm not the expert on the matter. I'm not the expert on the matter, but I would assume that some frictions are still around.
Yeah, and if you can see, other neighbors are not scoring particular way either. Czechs, Slovaks. I mean, like seriously, they're all performing not as good as Italians or Americans.
How to better interpret this? I mean, all of this is rather, you know, rather similar in terms of discrimination. Not discrimination in terms of social distance.
Slower, because the translators are not catching up with the answers. Sorry, I'll be like this.
I have this issue always with my presentations. I'm sorry, when I'm like thinking out loud, I'm speaking fast. So, can I?
Just, yeah, like that. Good.
Okay. So, all of those are basically not that much, not significantly different. It falls into the, well, tolerated. Better. But when we have this fall here, it happened to be the Jews as always. You see, so the steeper the fall, the longer the distance. So I would not say that the Lithuanians differ that significantly from, you know, like Ukrainians in the level of social distancing among the Polish people.
I would just suggest that, of course, we're trying to build the data into a certain theory or perception, but it would be useful perhaps to, we know that the Polish society aims to be tolerant, but maybe not yet there. It has low inclusion rate on race, on people of different other minorities in public representation. It also has a government that is explicitly criticizing certain minorities. So it would be good maybe for the future to think how specifically Belarusian is the issue of course, absolutely true discrimination that was happening to these people, and how much of that is Belarusians stopping being the favorite neighbor of Poles and suddenly being treated as many other foreigners.
Well, yes, but given that the discussion is going this way, I want to underline that the effort made by the Poles and Polish government is incredible. I mean, ever since the war started, to all of us. It's not only like because, well, I'm the prime, you know, interessant in all of this effort, but no, I mean, I'm absolutely serious. I'm absolutely serious. All of this cannot be changed, cannot be expected to, you know, shifted without major war happening, right? You see, so probably like the Belarusians and the Russians are the main victims of this graph after the war, but all of the rest, well, I think there is a progress. I think that something is getting done. So let's.
This is of course, I'm not going to interrogate you on the survey you didn't make, but I think in the future, if you guys are going to repeat this service, it would be great to see it in the historical perspective, but also, well, I see you're already crying. You don't want any more work. Okay, don't do any more service, but whoever will be doing other service can also look at this way. But what I want to ask you is, have you ever tried to compare, like, so these great figures you mentioned about Belarusians being willing to support Ukrainians and, of course, being anti-war, and then you tried some Chatham House research. But have you also tried recently maybe to study what Belarusians inside Belarus do, or is it impossible right now?
Well, of course it's possible. Of course we're doing that. Thank you for the opportunity to advertise the Belarusian Change Tracker second edition's release, which is going to happen on 27th of September, done with support of Friedrich Ebert-Stiftung. Thank you, Christopher. It's going to be online on the platform of Belarusian Press Club, I believe, right? Yeah. We're doing that. We're studying the attitudes.
Can you share at least something from it, like a very small preview?
Very small preview. Well, the divide inside the Belarusian society is really tough, and I would say that it stops being just on the political basis. It turns, or is already turned into, like, you know, social conflict based on the being included or excluded into the Belarusian system. I will not, you know, spoil it for you any further. Please wait for a few more days until the full report is released. Yeah, and there is, of course, a lot more interesting stuff in there.
To give you a little bit of a break from my questions, so I still have some, just, you know, be vigilant. I'd like to also look, well, at our live audience here. I see 3 hands. I don't know if anyone is going to help with the microphones. If not, I will be just giving mine. And, well, I will go for someone in the very back first. Please say, you need to come here, right? Okay, sorry. That's, hello, whoever is tracking us, Gubopik, we're here. Please say who you are, which organization you represent, and what your question.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the presentation. My name is Kiwi, and I'm working for Atlantic Council, but I'm from Georgia. And the question is also related to the survey you did in Georgia. So, I think that one of the circumstances that differentiates Georgia from Ukraine and Poland is that we have also a big number of Russians currently living in Georgia. And there was a specific slide and also part in your survey about attitudes of Ukrainians in Poland towards Belarusians. But I kind of was expecting that Belarusians in Georgia would also say something about Russians living in Georgia and what's the dynamics between these two groups in the country, because currently when I'm looking at the social media in Georgia, people are getting very unhappy with the presence of growing number of Russians. And if Belarusians experience some sort of discrimination from Ukrainians in Poland, I'm just wondering, what do they feel about Russians in Georgia? We don't have that many Ukrainians, it's just 30,000. But we have a huge amount, more than 50,000 Russians there. So did you ask questions about specifically how they interact with Russians? And also, second question I wanted to ask is about the type of discrimination the Belarusians experience in Poland. So did you ask more like in-depth questions for them to elaborate on what do exactly they mean when they speak about discrimination from Ukrainians? Because if, for instance, Polish employer prefers to hire Ukrainian instead of Belarusians, do they see it as a discrimination? And is it Ukrainians' fault that Polish employers prefer to hire Ukrainian? Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with the easy one. At the moment of the survey, the people in the Belarusians in Georgia, we can see the figure, right? The Russians were not the, where's the dot? The Russians were not really the large major contributor into the grievances, you know, of Belarusians in Georgia. One could speculate why is that so, because, well, Belarusians tend to understand that the Belarusian state is co-aggressor state. The Belarusians, well, it is probably like a bit of a really hard leap, but probably emphasize a bit with the Russians who fled the Putin's regime in Georgia, because the situation more or less, I mean, it's different, but it's similar, yeah. And so I'm not really sure about the situation now, given this mass immigration wave of Russians who try to flee the conscription, yeah. But back then it was not that much of a problem. On your second question about please correct me if I'll just repeat it, so if I do not
I can repeat for you, so he doesn't have to stand up. What exactly people mean by discrimination in Poland? For example, if a Ukrainian is offered a job instead of a Belarusian by a Polish employer, do they consider it discrimination? Yes, no, and from Ukrainians or from Poles?
Unfortunately, we don't really have that much of an in-depth understanding about that. We have some open-ended records of people describing their grievances. It's mostly the stories of the abuse. Like, I was fired because they said that they don't want to have like Lukashenkovцы at the job. There are some like really bad stories like this one, or there are some more creepy stories like there is a person who reported that every morning they wake up and every morning they find the wipers, the wipers on the car raised on every car which has the Belarusian number plate. So someone kind of, you know, targets the Belarusian cars and raising the wipers. I mean, it's probably no big deal, but it's creepy. You should handle that.
Okay, we'll move into anecdotal evidence, but the short answer, no, you did not follow with focus groups or like...
No, we did not do the qualitative that much, but...
which maybe gives you another workload of job, but we have both Veronika and Alexei here, but Veronika spoke for 1 hour, 40 minutes in the previous session, so we'll give Alexei, no? Okay, well, you see, Veronika, you've been promoted, you speak next. Please come, still say who you are, because maybe not everyone followed your previous brilliant session, and ask your question.
I spoke for about 15 minutes. I was keeping track so that you know, less than you. So my name is Veronika Laputska. I'm representing a center, and thank you very much, Maria, thank you very much, Philip, for this fantastic discussion. I wanted to ask you, why, did you, maybe I've missed it, also assess physical abuse? Because, for instance, I know that a lot of people are, for instance, whom I know in Poland, unfortunately, have sometimes come across this. I've been abused physically also once, as long as like last year, actually. So are you planning maybe to do this kind of research? Because unfortunately it's happening. There are, you know, fights between groups of men. We know that there are car crashes, that there are some, sometimes problems with property when people paint something, so this is kind of more physical. So are you planning to do this? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we can roughly estimate the physical abuse here because, well, that's of course not the best way to do that. There are certain techniques. The direct question is not always the best idea, you know, to do that. So this might be a lower figure than it is in the reality, but it's not that given our data, it's not really that prevalent. It's 5% in Poland. I mean, well, that's thinking about it, it's rather high, yeah. But 2% in Georgia, 2% in Lithuania. It's well.
What is the sample error margin?
For these numbers, it would be like around 1 and 5% or something. So
it's significantly.
There are no, it's not really significantly different. I would not be saying that. For Lithuania, for instance, like not that many people encounter the discrimination. There are only 63%. But for Poland, it's significant differences are marked here, all of them. So it's one could say that 5% is already well concerning enough, yeah. That's not the main source of, not the main feed of the discrimination, but of course each and every case which makes it public contributes heavily into the atmosphere about these beatings of Ukrainian and Belarusians on the playground or something which happened in Warsaw. and other stuff. It contributes a great deal of into the atmosphere of hate.
Thank you very much. And if, let's say, you could come, to make it more difficult for you, I want to ask you a question, and then I see one more hand. You've been collecting the cases of discrimination of Belarusians in Poland quite voluntarily. You, of course, have to say later who you are, but I know that already. But we also know that in some cases, what Belarusians considered cases of discrimination were sometimes coming from their lack of practice of questioning the decisions of certain employees or authorities. Could you speak about some success cases, so we don't make it doom and gloom, when a letter or something else would help actually deal with the case?
Yes, my name is Alexei. I'm co-founder and administrator on the daily basis of the Buy Help initiative. About the banks, that was one of the 3 points I wanted to comment, so I'll start with it since you've asked. Now, I'll start with Lithuania, because I think there is a certain aberration here. I tried to open an account in Lithuania twice. It was well before the war. First time as a Belarusian citizen, second time as a Polish citizen. And now I apologize my language, in both cases this was a fucking nightmare. First thing is...
I still ask to use the language because we're broadcasting, so okay. Please.
Sorry.
Almost BBC.
First is the Lithuanian system, and everybody pretty much who is in Lithuania, they accept that the bureaucratical hurdles on opening an account is quite high compared to Poland. So what may have been considered a discrimination in Lithuania is actually a bit of an exaggeration of a regular practice. So for instance, when I tried to open an account in Lithuania first time, they asked 30 euros of me just to accept my application, and then they said no. Then they asked another 30 euros in another bank, and they said no. Yeah, sorry. So that's one thing. It is complicated. A lot of Belarusian individual entrepreneurs who are working in Lithuania, they were saying it's first difficult to open an account, and the monitoring requirements...
I'll ask to move to then two other points, because it's still not a panel. I was asked to have only one speaker at the panel. So what are the two other cases?
So second is, if we're coming to to Poland, there were two cases that caught my attention. So first is PKO BP, which is a bank here which used to open accounts for the no residents out of the European Union on the basis of a passport only. When the war started, we have encountered several dozen instances at least that people were refused an account. Some have been thrown their passport in their faces. I think it's an exaggeration, but still. But in every single case, they were not given a justification. They were just saying, that's because you're Belarusian. But Belarusian isn't really a justification here. I mean, you cannot discriminate on the basis of a nationality. You can introduce certain rules and follow these rules. So basically what we did in a couple of instances, I picked several people who wrote to me. We went to PKO, to the same department, to the same man or woman, and asked them again, would you kindly open an account for us? And they say, no, because Belarusians. I said, just give it to me in writing with a signature, or I will report you to the police. That's basically what I said. Obviously, there was no internal regulation, nothing. There was an aberration on the side of the clerk. Second is...
So did they open?
They opened, yes.
The third case?
Second instance, same PKO BP, sorry, that's another one, where they said, we are referring to sanctions. They gave me a list which basically listed that there were like 200 people sanctioned in Russia and Belarus, and based on that, we will not open you an account. So I just said, look, can you find my clients on this list of 200 people? And they said, they opened an account in the very end after I asked for the manager. Third instance is BNP Paribas. They immediately stopped opening accounts for Belarusians, citing sanctions again. There are two things that make it peculiar. First is this bank actually never accepted applications for accounts from Belarusians who did not have a residence permit, so their target audience was small. And second is, after a certain time passed and after several requests to comment on why exactly are you putting a flat ban on everyone, they actually rescinded this. stupid thing. So you said over-compliance. There may be an over-compliance, and for which you need to actually, quietly and calmly, not like me here, follow the chain of command. If there's a prohibition, give it in writing. Call the manager, write to the headquarters. It kind of works at some point. And second option, yeah.
I'll stop you now because I want to keep an intrigue. Those people who want to know more will approach you personally later. We have one more question, so that Philipp here doesn't feel too relaxed, but if you want to make one comment, you can do it.
I just wanted to make another comment that the Jews are actually quite not high on the list of preferences of the Polish nation, so just a bit of a interesting observation. I mean, that table. So they had the Anglo-Saxons on the top, then they had the Slavic nations, and then they had pretty much the rest. So,
okay, thank you for this observation, and please give the microphone to the next person. Коли ласка, коли ви хочете задавати питання по-білоруську, ви можете задавати питання по-білоруську.
If you want to ask a question in Russian, go ahead. My name is Sergei Stankevich, and I can basically confirm if you want cases of discriminations, so banks, and for example, in the railway, I was fined because I haven't signed a ticket, and then they reimbursed me that fine. I also couldn't open an account. I also couldn't open the foreign currency account, so I was refused. I was denied, and actually we got very different answers from different banks. So Santander told us that you're under sanctions, and other banks just gave us different ideas. So if we don't know the procedure, they just prefer to make it as bureaucratic as possible and just, make us give up. So I understand that, I feel that. So how do I actually protect my rights?
Philipp, as a sociologist, can answer the question, but should you have knowledge about that in the audience, you can also raise your hand and add something. Thank you for your question. I really regret to hear that something like that happened to you. I think it's best to contact these authorities and representatives and Belarusian Center and Paulina and organizations who are present here. While I was in Ukraine, I received a lot of assistance from that, this Youth Hub and Solidarity Center. We all are ready to help. And the research that was discussed here, advocacy is needed, this procedural work, cooperation with offices, with authorities, policy. How do I say it in English and Belarusian? Okay, so you cooperate with offices, with authorities, with representatives, maybe trade unions can help. We also sent the report and the results of the research to Polish representatives so that they know that Belarusians who live in Poland, they mostly support Ukraine, they're against the Lukashenko regime. And these are not people who support Lukashenko's regime. So such advocacy and systemic work will change the situation. Thank you very much. Would you like to answer Igor's question? I can see Veronika and Alexei. Maybe you want to answer the question. Please use mics. And we would like to see you. Can you remind us about the question discrimination? What can be done when we see facts of discrimination? A sociological service help us. We have Svetlana Tikhanovska's office and cabinet. What can be done in such a situation when we face discrimination? Let me reiterate something I've been writing several times in such a case. When it is about opening a bank account, this is not about compliance. You have to require answers in writing. You have to contact the manager. These are civilized countries, and this approach works. As regards the lease and rent, the situation is more difficult here. For example, you can see information that we will not rent places to Ukrainians and Belarusians. We have been witnessing that, such notices, and I cannot recommend any solution here. But I can say that the majority of people who arrived in Poland have found a place to rent. It is difficult to prove discrimination in such a case. But when someone says straight to you that it's because you are from the Eastern Europe and you can contact the center that is in charge of monitoring xenophobic behaviors in Poland. And there was such a case in my situation where a person who was about to rent the flat, he started fighting and shouting curse words that you are from Belarus and so on. And we informed the police. It's not a discrimination, it's violent incidents with people who are misbehaving. We had another question. Please use the mic. And then I'll ask a few questions.
I want to make some comments about discrimination, and I have some experience with business. Personally, to open the bank accounts, not only one. And I know from my experience, before the war, it was in Urząd, the city administration was just a bad service sometimes. You can go to different opens and they find the people who doesn't know how the laws work. It's not connected with discrimination and just connected with sometimes bad quality of workers in bank, sometimes are in administration. And which bank accounts, from my experience, there is a lot of cases where the people just, but every bank have some like scripts and rules how they can open the bank account. And they probably, a lot of the Belarusian people who are trying to start a business, they just sometimes bring it the wrong documents. Who doesn't accept it. There's like, for example, for PKO, you must bring it CBR, you must make this application because to go to, before they go to the bank, and most of the people just refuse this rule. And after they trying to talk, told there is discrimination. Yes, it's true. There is some people have find the discrimination in the banks, but how the told, like I forget names. There is impossible to write. There is a special department who's fighting with discrimination, and they can't start the process if it really exists. So it's possible to like do it something with this.
Thank you very much for the solution. Can you pass the microphone here? So what we just had here, it looked a little bit like a focus group, or I don't know, the discriminated and non-discriminated anonymous group. But what I think it shows is that there is such a body for more qualitative research of what is discrimination or not, whether we use the term correctly, how in general Belarusians fit into the society of the countries that accept them, which very often have a lot of problems. And Philipp, from your experience as a sociologist, do you maybe sit on some other data, and do you have enough of such data from other researchers that can help you understand this issue more complex? And if not, then maybe why? And if yes, then where can we find them?
Well, That's the really interesting question. There is never enough data, you know, you can always have some more. So, should I, like that, is it okay like that? Okay, so you could always have some more data, and well, given that it's really hard these days to study the public opinion in Belarus because, well, the government does not make any easier for us with all of the repressions and all of the persecution of people who attempt to do this and in contributing to the atmosphere of hate and making people more afraid to answer the questions. Well, every bit of the data is really important, and I know for sure that there are like a lot of researchers which are close, like this one. I'm actually referring to one of them. I cannot name the company which provided the data. I only got the agreement to utilize it on the terms that I changed the visualization, I changed the ordering and stuff like that specifically for this report, and I never mentioned who did this. Yeah, and there are a lot of data quite like that, especially concerning the public opinion inside Belarus. Like I know for sure that there are telephone interviews which are conducted on regular basis and which are never published due to some reason. I know that there are online results of the online surveys which are like that. In fact, not that many researchers do publish their reports, such as Rigora Stepenia, Chatham House, such as we do at Belarusian Tracker. Sometimes the German research publishes itself, like choice, for instance, but they are not really regular, or they do not publish everything they do, of course. So that's the really important and pressing matter, actually, because I know that there are quite a lot of stuff happening, but it's not available for public use. And like, for instance, there is a certain research of diaspora circulating right now, and there are focus groups which were held in the diaspora, which could be utilized to develop some sort of a policy making for easing the diaspora's life, but these focus groups are not for public use. I just know, I'm aware of their existence.
Do you, as a researcher at least, do you have access to them? Can you read them?
Well, these reports always find their way to those people who are really interested in them. You know, the issue here is that you can never utilize them properly. Well, when writing some policy papers, for instance, or doing comparative report, comparing your results, like cross-checking it, you could just sit and like, oh yeah, I'm privileged enough to be, to have access to some classified data, and then you can do with it whatever you do. You can invent it, you cannot criticize it properly if you think that it's somehow flawed. So, well, that's the main issue here. I would utilize this platform to promote openness in terms of publishing the reports and data sets and on the Belarus, because, well, we are in the same boat with this. In terms of studying the diaspora, I believe that it's a really hot topic, actually, because, well, diaspora is only growing, and it's just going to grow, and there is no, for us, there is no basis for the hope that the immigration would stop, that the exodus of people with certain political views would stop from Belarus, so that it would be somehow overturned. So the communities of Belarusians inside Poland, inside Lithuania, inside Georgia would only continue to grow, and to study how they are formed, how they live, how they assimilate, is needed to generate enough evidence for fruitful policy making, to communicate with the governments of the said countries, to ease the lives of Belarusians inside these countries. So I guess that's the hot topic here.
I think we have Atlantic Council here. We have pretty, right? That's one task you could maybe undertake, helping the Belarusians also in your home countries Friedrich Hebel Stiftung is here, there are some other actors. So you've heard the call of the researcher. I know he's not the only one that's returning on many closed sessions and open sessions. Please, let's open the data as much as possible so that we could less speculate and more provide data-based and research-based conclusions about what is happening with the societies, with the groups of population. But I see that there is a hand, actually, from the organization I think that I've just mentioned. Could you give the microphone, please? Please say your name and position.
Now it's on. Just very briefly, it's the third time I'm attending a presentation of the study, actually, and it's the third time I'm saying this because there's a tendency, if you see all these figures and if you're yourself also feeling some of this discrimination kinds, that you forget about the first two parts of the study, which are about how many Belarusians abroad are actually supporting Ukrainians, how many Belarusians abroad are actually standing with Ukraine and condemning Russia's war against Ukraine. And I mean, we have seen amazing campaigns in 2020. Up there, here in this building, is still this painting that reminds us of the Sasha 3% campaign. And this was also something I think that was in the very beginning when this was planned. We didn't expect these kind of figures. We did expect that there would be a majority of Belarusians abroad that would have a clear stance, but that would be this clear was still a surprise. And I mean, it's sad that the ambassador Stepanka is already gone, but actually this is, I think, a job also of the Belarusian democracy movement to utilize such figures and to make them visible to the countries that Belarusians had to come to, so that they can fight for the cause. It's important to talk about this discrimination, but I think to make clear where Belarusians are standing is a step towards avoiding this kind of discrimination, and that's very important to focus on as well in this study, and it's a very important part of this study.
So do you commit as a foundation to continue supporting such studies regularly?
We do support other studies, as Philipp has already mentioned. I think we, at the Minsk Forum in Berlin, will have more studies we'll talk about that we support, so that is the case.
Thanks for this great job, and it was Christopher Forst for those who watched broadcasting. We're moving into the closing remarks, unless there are some pressing questions from the audience. I would then, oh yes, Marina, please come take the microphone. Say to everyone else who you are and your questions, and then we will move to the final remarks by our distinguished guest and to the closure.
My name is Marina Vorobey, and I represent the Service for Unation and Self-Organization Free Union.online. And the question is, could you please say more information about supporting Ukraine from Belarusians? Probably you can tell the statistics of very specific things people do, just not to support in words, but to support in cases, in some things. It could be money or some doings, because we have the page on our service, Belarus for Ukrainians, and we have 400 cases of supporting and dues, but probably you can explain more what Belarusians do.
Well, I would gladly repeat myself. I mean, as we said, it's can I be heard? Yeah, okay. It's very rarely like 1%. I'm talking 1% out of 100. Only like words. only mentions on social network. It's mostly like participation in rallies. It's provision of material assistance, like transferring the funds, for instance, like you've mentioned, of providing the material assistance, the clothing, the items, the food, the volunteering, the charitable events, the housing for the refugees. Like 80% of Belarusians in Poland participated in this particular activity. So yeah, the support is really there, and I know it's not probably not exhausting list of all the activities which Belarusian people do, but this grouping and aggregation is says a lot for itself.
Well, thank you for this repetition. There was so much information that it's actually good to return to certain slides. If you would say 2 key points from this study that everyone should remember and think at home about, what are these 2 key findings out of your 5, or maybe something that you personally find the most important you would want everyone present here and online take home with them?
Well, first of all, I mean, I would not be really disregarding of the issue. It's there. The issue is there. The discrimination is real. It's happening. There are a lot of people who do this. It's noted. It's cross-checked with other surveys. It's triangulates with the attitudes of Poles, which worsens towards the Belarusians. It's there. Something needs to be done about that, and some structural job needs to be done. And what can be utilized in order to do this? It's to promote the positive image of Belarusians inside these countries, because I would speculate that quite a lot of people in Poland simply just do not realize that the Belarusians they meet are much less likely to be supportive of Lukashenko regime. And as we see here, even if Belarusian community, if a person out of it encountered the discrimination, that's the second thing. Even if they did so, they are still eager to participate in, supporting the Ukraine with the good cause. So that's the something to be proud of course, because it's not for the personal reasons that people do support the good stuff. Let's be plain about it. It's the matter of good and evil.
2 things. First, don't ignore the discrimination. Second, be proactive about showing how actually good and selfless many Belarusians are. Right?
Yeah, are and can be, and where Belarusians stand in all of this.
Well, thank you very much, Philipp. Round of applause again. I forgot to say who I was in the beginning, so I'm Maria Sadouskaya-Komlach. I just passing by, then asked me to sit on the stage, but I also in my free time work as a team leader for Europe and Central Asia for a Dutch organization, Free Press Unlimited. Thank you very much, and now the closing remarks.